Hello, this little video is by Donna Williams and I'm dedicating this one to the topic of autism-friendly interior design. So I wrote a book called Autism: An Inside Out Approach, which is essentially an environmental troubleshooter's guide to creating autism-friendly environments. And that's in schools or homes or activity groups, all that kind of stuff. So starting with what is an autism-friendly environment? I guess it really depends on which person with autism you're talking about. But if you're dealing with a particular person with autism, then you set about addressing that by saying, what is that person's particular fruit salad? Do they have sensory hypersensitivities? If so, what kind? Are they to do with touch? Do they struggle to process touch? If so, are we expecting them to go into a very touchy-feely atmosphere with no advocacy? Have we given them an escape space to get away from touchy-feely people? Is there a way that they can access this activity without a whole lot of social physical contact? That sort of thing. If their issue is language processing, is the activity solely language based? Is it in bullet points? Is it kept very visual with representational objects and a lot of gesture about what the people are talking about, or not? If the person has a communication disorder, is there access to type communication there? Do they accept and respect that this is a nonverbal person who uses alternative communication? Are they going into an activity that is based on having verbal speech? Is that activity accessible if you use, say, type communication? Or if you don't have that, is this activity accessible to people who are just going to be doing rather than speaking or typing? And if they're not able to be doing the doing, if they're a person who's more a people watcher or they have very high exposure anxiety, so they can't access an activity instantly, they need to take time to map it all out, to wait until the heat's off and nobody's jumping in and controlling them, and then they might start to test the water with the activity. Does this activity allow for people to do some people watching, do some fly on the wall stuff, to just absorb the patterns, take in the voices and movements if, say, they're face blind, before they're expected to interact with what to them keeps feeling like very unfamiliar people, and may continue to do so. Is the person able to visually process their environment, or does everything fragment? If it really fragments, you might find that low lighting, like wall lights rather than overhead lights, warm lighting rather than the harsh white lighting, work better. Lampshades rather than overhead lights. You might want to make available the possibility that the person has sunglasses indoors or has their own, so that they can cut down on amount of incoming visual information. It gives their brain more time to process what's left, and then their stress level should come down as well. But there are other things. In my house, for example, recognizing objects was a challenge and staying on track. And if I went over to this side of the room, it was very hard to coordinate it with things on that side of the room and to put those together as a whole activity. And so I've always kept the bedroom in a way that has a very logical order. So, underwear will be here, and then there'll be socks, and then there'll be, bottoms, and then there'll be tops, and then there'll be jumpers. And so it's all in the logical sequence that you might put those things on. Commonly, I'll also have shelves that are open where I can actually see the categories of things rather than having everything tucked away. Certainly I'm more adapted now, but in other years, I definitely needed to be able to see things to trigger what to do with them. If I didn't see them in their categories, or if they were jumbled about, my brain just went stuck gear sort of thing. The kitchen is an interesting one. So again, I have everything in logical order. So there's the kettle there, and the things that you put in the kettle above it, and the cups are underneath it. There's the cooker over there, and underneath it are the pots, and next to, in a drawer next to it, are all the things, that utensils that you use in cooking. And underneath that is where all the plates are. So everything comes together. The fridge is just a reach behind all of the cooker stuff. So there's not a lot of having to cross the room and coordinate. And because of the visual processing issues, when I walk into a kitchen, if there's all kinds of stuff on the worktop that doesn't belong there, it's very hard for me to stay on track and be triggered into the procession of thoughts that will allow me, say, to make toast. So if I come in and let's say somebody's put a camera on the kitchen worktop, I'll be sort of jarred because I can't get to the concept of the kitchen because there's a camera there. Or maybe somebody has put the cups, in another part of the kitchen, and I will look and I will see cups, but there won't be any connection with, and that's what you put the stuff in, and then you've got to put the kettle on. So I have to gather everything into the right places to stimulate the thoughts of how to coordinate things. I take time to have to map the pattern of how to use a room. So if I come into a new space, I'll commonly want to reorganize it like the last place that I was in, so that my body, because my body tends to be my eyes, if you like, and the way my body maps a room is what brings out the thought processes that help me connect everything. So if you change it physically on me, if usually, the kettle and the tea and the cups are on this side of the room, and I go into another house and instead they're in the middle, and over here are Tupperware and over there is something else, I might not be able to function as I would at home. And you might think, oh, well, hang on a minute, why doesn't she just look and understand and do? But just like with maths, if I throw really challenging maths at somebody who has dyscalculia, in other words, a significant problem processing mathematics, their brain will kind of freeze up and they can work through it very ploddingly and slowly with a lot of tools and help, but it's not just straightforward. And the same happens for me, I guess, in visual processing. And so I need my space to be in a logical sequence, and all the things that are in there belong to that concept. And I guess the other thing is sound. And if we're talking autism-friendly environments, I have difficulty processing language when there's other noises around, so fans or outside noises or chatter in the other rooms and stuff like that. But you can set up furniture and floor coverings, and you can double glaze windows, for example, or use curtains to close sound out, to control sound. You can put curtains across doorways and archways, for example, that help contain sound. You can insulate ceilings that will change the acoustics in a room and sort of gather sound more immediately for you, in a sense. There's less reverb in the room. Keeping things not too visually full on, everything in its place, in a sense, without constant visual chaos. Having good contrasts between background and foreground. So I don't like coming into a place where it's all where it's all white walls and white objects. It's very hard for me to quickly click and go straight to use the things because everything's blending in. So these days we tend to have a very homogenized use of colour. So you might walk into a place and everything's beige, or everything's silver, and I like I guess a particular background, foreground contrast. So I tend to like rustic colours. This room behind me hasn't been painted yet, but I tend to like quite rustic colours because the objects that are in the room seem to stand out better in that whole background, foreground contrast. When we're talking autism-friendly environments as well, escape spaces, so ways of going and being in your own space, of having space breaks away from language, away from the sound of TV, away from the sound of computers, away from the sound of, screaming kids or whatever, just places, little sanctuaries. And you can make these out in the garden. You can make little sensory spaces out in the garden. You can make them on a back porch. You can make them, in a small room, even a closet, in the far reaches of your home. If you have a very small place, you can even make it underneath a table with a tablecloth, something that allows somebody to go and just get into a quiet space, a sanctuary that doesn't feel like it's subject to the same level of not just social invasion but the sensory invasion. I think that's getting close to it. Autism friendly can also mean looking at things like diet, and there are a lot of people with food intolerances and food allergies. So I will commonly be invited to events where they will have the standard type of, food that is wheat and dairy, sugar, soy-based stuff, high salicylate stuff. And I can't access any of it, so I've just got to watch people eat and drink, and I can't have it, because if I have it, then I have the associated physical issues or severe sensory perceptual fluctuations, and can't process information, can't speak straight. So what you can do with that is it becomes a BYO situation, and it is okay for the person with autism to bring some of their food along, even if they are going to mostly eat theirs, or to advocate about what it is that they can eat, to be able to send that list ahead, what they can eat, what they can drink. But also looking at choosing, for example, choosing venues or choosing catering that can adapt to the type of food needs. And it might be that somebody has a significant issue with a certain textures or certain types of tastes that they just haven't been able to accommodate that or get into that. Some people can't stand slimy tastes. Other people love custard and sauces. Some people only like crunchy textures, and some people are very happy with things that are chewy. Some people don't do chewing. I was a non-chewing kind of person, so everything tended to be like custardy stuff. This is before all my food intolerances were understood. But yeah, I had a lot of difficulty with chewing, which is just essentially a motor planning thing, and I would try to eat food with quite a lot of chewing, and it just gets stuck in my throat, and then I get kind of distressed and just keep re-chewing and re-chewing, bringing that food up, and I mean that's not necessarily accessible. So, but I'm past that now. I'm okay about that. But it just shows some of that diversity. Motor planning issues. You might have an activity that involves having to have fine motor control. Is this inclusive for somebody who doesn't have that fine motor control, for whom that's going to be really frustrating? Is your home able to accommodate people with motor planning issues? To open a door handle, to use a key? Is this really fiddly movements to unlock something? Like a lot of places have window locks. Are these accessible to people with fine motor problems? Another issue is temperature. So I was certainly one of these people who didn't respond to being burned, and I constantly couldn't coordinate the bath and when to get in it, and one side stood in the really hot water, how to get back out of it, and how to coordinate all that. So an autism-friendly environment might mean it's a place where the temperature control on the taps is already set, so the person can't easily burn themselves. An autism-friendly environment might be a cooker that turns itself back off because the person doesn't have the attention span to monitor the cooking. An autism-friendly environment might be a place that has things like the microwave rather than a cooktop. And the other day I came home with my shopping and I plonked it on the cooker, and it had tapped one of the knobs, and next thing my bag had gone up in flames and the house was filled with smoke. So it shows and it shows the kind of issues that a person with autism can commonly fail to process, that those things might happen. I used to be the flood queen, so an autism-friendly environment might be, or home might be one that's got an overflow on the bath, so that the house is not being constantly flooded. You might have somebody who has compulsions with water, and there's a very high level of water use. So you might have an autism-friendly place where the main taps are push taps like you have in the public toilets. They only run for a certain amount of time and then they turn themselves off. You might have people who are constantly flicking light switches, where you can install lighting that is movement sensitive, comes on when they've entered the room, turns off when there's no movement in the room. Or that the light comes on only for a certain amount of time and then they've got to go and put it back on again. Some of those kind of things. So there are systems that you can put in place in your home that can make your plumbing much more autism friendly, temperature control, cooking devices, and the types of cooking devices that may work better for particular people. Heaters, people who stand in front of heaters and don't realise that they have stood there too long, and they're greatly at risk of burning their clothes. So there are types of heaters that are going to be less likely to lead someone to having a fire. A lot of people with autism don't gauge distance. So have they put their clothes too close to the fire? Are these all going to go up in flames? They're going to have a house fire. Have you adapted to that and kept that in mind? Things like hygiene. A lot of people with autism are afraid of vacuum cleaners or very done in by vacuum cleaners. So does this house have carpet and require vacuum cleaning? Or is it a place that's got moppable floors and some nice rugs that can be rolled up, taken outside and shaken out? Because that might be both a lot cleaner for somebody who can't gauge when to clean, but it might, or who can't use the vacuum cleaner, but it's also it's going to be a healthier space ultimately for those people. So I think that's probably covered it. Chemicals. A lot of people on the autism spectrum have allergies, and some of them have poor detoxes and might have immune or autoimmune issues that are triggered by the use of particular types of chemicals, household chemicals, garden chemicals. So you might want to look at which kind of more environmentally friendly products that you use in those households. Think about the use of fragrances. Do you really need to fill the house with petrol-based perfumes and fragrances, which a large percentage of people with autism, it'll give them headaches, make them feel woozy, even if they crave sniffing them, just like some people sniff glue or petrol. Perfumes, and including the kind of perfumes and deodorants and stuff, are commonly from petrol. They're petrol-based fragrances. And even looking at things like essential oils, a lot of those are really high in salicylate. So if you've got a salicylate intolerant person, think about how you're going to manage that if you're going to use aerosols or toilet flush things or plug-in smellies, you know, or perfumey stuff, because you might need to adapt that. You might want to look at things that are a lot more natural and are low in salicylate, like lemon scented things, for example. Yeah, I think that might have more or less covered it. There are some people with autism who can't stand baths and only have showers. Some people with autism who freak out about water on their head and can't stand showers. I was one of those people, very nervous of showers. I have got over it, but I tend to be a bath person, and these are the kind of things you want to have a think about in relation to an autism-friendly environment. Toilets. People who are distressed by the sound of the flushing, and I was one of those people, so I'd always avoid flushing and always leave it for the next person. I have got over it, so look at all the things that I've worked on, and it's really interesting because the more really heavy-duty crap that happens in your life, the easier all the other stuff you thought was really way too much becomes possible. But there are self-flushing toilets like in the public toilets, that when you step away from the toilet, it will self-flush. So there are solutions for things like that. I mean, there are people with autism who will reach into the toilet bowl as well, and if you've got a self-flushing toilet, they won't lose their arm, but they probably won't be able to grab hold of, you know, shit and stuff they really shouldn't have their hands in. So if you think about toilets and people with autism, you've got to think about, well, how would I protect my cat from what's in the toilet? And how might I want to adapt the toilet to independent living for someone with autism? And just because I say that's someone with autism, of course, a lot of people with autism won't have any of these issues at all. But I need to mention, you know, the people that might. Toilet paper is an interesting one. So some people have a lot of challenges with texture, and they won't use certain types of toilet paper, and obviously they have to get used to it, and you can't necessarily pander to that. But I think that's something that you can still keep in mind. I know that when I was in late childhood, I used the towel instead of the toilet roll because they were both white. They were both hanging on a piece of metal, and they were both near the toilet, but one was softer than the other. And I think that could have been solved, and was in fact solved, by them competing with the towel by having much better toilet paper. And you shouldn't have to do that for an autie. You know, we live in a world where we're meant to think about each other and respect each other. You shouldn't have to put up with that sort of rubbish. But the fact is that if you have autism, you might have difficulty thinking about the needs of the other person, that when you're caught up in an action, you're just thinking about what you like. You're working on an animal level, in a sense. Or you might be the kind of person who actually feels so socially invaded that you really don't care that you're putting other people off, because that feels good to get some distance. You don't want them to approve of you, because you wouldn't want them to sidle up to you and become joined at the hip and, you know, become even more invasive than what you already perceive them to be, you know, in your auti reality. It might be that you are, say, meaning deaf or face blind, or, you know, see the world in bits, or have a significant communication disorder, and you're already feeling quite a world apart, in which case caring about how you're upsetting other people, you're already upset. And it's the world that feels to you like the world has upset you. So from the other side now, of course, I look at that and I say that is absolutely no justification for revolting behaviour. There's absolutely no justification for the type of behaviour that makes us unable to live with each other. But the fact is, some people with autism do on a regular basis engage in all kinds of behaviours that make it impossible somehow to, to live in any comfortable way with that. I mean, poo smearing and various stuff that some significantly challenged people with autism have done. Yeah. I mean, there's another one is ripping. People who rip stuff. So if you've got a ripper, laminate. If you've laminated it, it's much harder to rip. And it was a paper shredder. If I found things with writing on them as well, I tended to shred them. And at one point, Chris found checks in the fireplace. I shredded pretty much anything that had writing on it. I don't know, I just had a kind of phobia about things that had writing on them. But I also loved the sound of ripping paper, and I also used to rip my clothes when I was angry. So you can get people who have developed a fixation with rebellion or with just enjoying that sound, whether it's ripping fabric or ripping paper. And you've got things like laminating, but also you can choose the types of fabrics that don't easily rip. So that's all workable as well. Yeah, I think that's probably just about it. I could go on and on about autism-friendly environments. When it comes to outdoors and gardens, a lot of people with autism love to, walk on rock walls or walk on rails, a bit like the cat. I was a rail walker and a rock wall walker. Love it, love it, love it. Gravel piles, love it. Walking on sand hills, love it. Sand pits, love it. Bark piles, love it. Being among trees and their different textures and the foliage, being able to roll in grass, having a hill to roll down. These were all things that I think I interacted a lot with textures and with landscape materials and with plants. Also with little critters. I liked snails. I had a thing with worms. I like, crickets, a lot of creatures, little creatures, like fish. So I love fish ponds. So having a fish pond where someone with autism can go and sit quietly and just hang out with a living creature that's moving and being. Places that collect the little mini beasts, that attract mini beasts. So gardens that attract mini beasts, gardens that attract butterflies. All those things can be really grounding, I guess, for a person with autism, but even providing them with a sense of communing with something, a sense of being social and connected in the world. So just because you might feel you're failing in the people world or the communication world, or doesn't mean that you're failing in the world in general. So those things can be really therapeutic. An art space. I'm an artist, and I think that there's a lot of auties who have autism, and just having that ability to create art with nature, to get a stick and draw in the sand, to have a big piece of perspex that you can, paint on with water or with mud for that matter. Ways of using the outdoors as an art studio to make temporary texture-based experiments, I think can be also quite autism-friendly. So an autism-friendly environment, it's vast. Everywhere from a place that describes and fills in the gaps for people who can't read facial expression, body language and intonation, that provides advocacy, that provides a befriending system so that people have someone who helps them navigate and fit in, to how to help people manage who can't tell that they're burning themselves, or that they're what they were last doing, and when they've left a room. So it's very, very vast, and I hope that gives a bit of an overview about a whole range of things that may be beneficial in creating autism-friendly environments. So for more information, visit my website, donnawilliams.net, and you might be able to also find a lot of ideas in the book Autism: An Inside Out Approach. Thanks a lot.